Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura's Handmade Haven. Welcome and welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. We're continuing our Happy Hour Quilt sew-along, and this is the week we're going to tackle that Happy Hour lettering at the bottom of our quilt. So we have a lot of bias tape to make and a lot of bias tape to curve and glue base and applique down, but we're going to get through it one step at a time. I'm going to share lots of tips and tricks with you along the way just to show you on some quicker, easier ways to get that bias tape laid out and to have your Happy Hour lettering complete for your quilt. So the first thing I want to share with you is a couple tools you're going to want to grab this week just because I feel like they're really going to help you if you have them. First and foremost, make sure you have a chalk pencil of some sort because that's going to help you trace out your Happy Hour lettering onto your fabric. A light box would be super helpful, but if you don't have one, don't fret. You can definitely get a sunny window and that will be perfectly acceptable. And then last but not least is a Teflon sheet. And I know that's going to sound a little weird, but I promise you, if you go to the kitchen and grab that Teflon sheet that you never use for cookies, grab it, bring it into the craft room today, and I'm going to show you how you can use it to really help with your bias tape, laying that out for that block. So the first thing we're going to do is head to the cutting table. We have some straight grain and cross grain bias tape to cut out. Then we're going to walk through how to get that bias tape made and turned into our lettering for this week. All right, so this week the only fabric colors we're using is this black cotton shot by benartex, and that is our background fabric. And then we also have a butter, and this is the fat quarter that we have not used yet. So our butter cotton shot fabric is what we're going to be making our lettering out of, and that's what we're going to be cutting our bias tape from. And I am using a Cricut Teflon sheet, but like I said, if you have one that you use for cookies or something, that's going to work just as well. I'm going to go ahead and take that label off just because I don't want to accidentally cut through it. The bias tape that we're making for the Happy Hour block is actually 1/2 inch. So we are going to cut all of our bias tape strips at 1 inch. And I'm going to go ahead and cut from basically corner to corner, I guess. Not really, because we want to make sure it's at a 45-degree angle. And I'm just going to use my 24-inch ruler and lay that where it will reach from side to side on my fat quarter. And that's going to be my longest piece. Now, if you're cutting this bias tape, this is what I want to tell you. You're going to need about 60 inches total, and we're cutting the cross grain bias tape first. That's very important because we want to make sure that we have enough of it. The longest piece you're going to need is about 15 inches, and that's for the O in Happy Hour. But I'm going to go ahead and cut this right here. And now I'm going to put this to the side for time being and flip this around so I can start cutting my cross grain bias tape for my Happy Hour block. And again, I'm just going to lay this so my 1 inch mark is right on that cut mark, and that is still a 45-degree angle. And since it's 1/2 inch bias tape, we're cutting these strips at 1 inch. And again, I need about 60 inches of this. So I'm going to cut 3, maybe 4 long strips. And that's going to give me plenty, but just in case I need, a little more because of how I cut my strips. It's always better to have more than wish you had. All right, so for these 4 strips, I'm going to just line up the bias tape, or the selvage end, sorry. I'm gonna line up the selvage end. I'm gonna cut off the selvage and then cut down the other side to give those points, because remember, that's gonna help me when I go to make my bias tape. It's gonna feed through the bias tape maker a lot easier. Now, these have an angled end down here, and that's a good way to remember that those are your cross grain bias tape pieces. However, I would suggest that you label these just so you don't forget which is which. Now, you'll definitely be able to tell. If you try to stretch your straight grain, it's not going to work very well. But if you want to be certain that you don't try to stretch the wrong thing, then you can go ahead and label those as your cross grain bias tape. All right, so, and then for the straight grain bias tape, we can just go straight down the side of our fat quarter. Make sure you do straighten that up first. And we're gonna need about 70 inches of straight grain bias tape. Now, both of those measurements are definitely inflated, and that's just because I wanna make sure you have enough that you don't run into an issue where you are, you're running out and you need, I don't want you to end up with like half a letter or something, right? That's not good. Okay, so this is going to give me about 60 with just those cuts. So I'm going to go ahead and cut one more. And that's going to give me about 80 inches of straight grain bias tape. And again, I only need about 70, but it's never a bad idea to have a little extra just in case something goes wrong, or just in case, you need a little extra because maybe your letter's a little bigger or something. I do have templates for you in the description box down below. Make sure that you check out those templates. It's an updated file. The Happy Hour lettering is in that file now for you. And I'm just going to line up these ends of my straight grain bias tape and also cut those off at the point, again, just to help myself get that through the bias tape maker here in a moment. And then I am going to go ahead and put this label back on there and put this off to the side. I'm not putting it away yet, just in case I need some additional, just in case something goes wrong. Let me explain how to use the 3 pieces of paper that are included in the sew along guide for your Happy Hour block. This is your lettering placement. This is what you're going to use to make your Happy Hour lettering on your background. And what you're going to do is you're just going to tape these together. So this line is the edge of the next sheet. So that should be taped just straight up and down. Same thing here. The line after the H at the beginning of hour, that's going to be right there. And this line is the edge of the second piece of paper. So those should line up. And then this will make your Happy Hour lettering for your background block. Now we're going to start by finding the middle of our fabric, which should be easy because you cut that as a width of fabric. Hopefully you had fabric that was at least 42.5 to 44 inches wide. If not, you're going to have to add on an additional piece to get the length long enough and then find the center of that strip. But this block will be 9.5 by 42.5 inches in dimension before we sew it into the quilt. So we just need to find the middle, which is easy enough because that's going to be the fold for me. And then you also want to find the center the other way. And I'm just going to put a little pin. I did make a crease with my finger. I'm just going to put a little pin right there just to say me that is the center of my block. And then the other thing that we're going to do, which I should have done before, but I didn't, is we're going to take this Happy Hour and we're going to fold the H's up so the top and bottom feet match and make a little crease in our paper. And then I'm also going to just make a little mark right here. So that is the absolute center of my Happy Hour segment. And then I'm going to take my fabric and line that little pin right up on that mark. Now, if I did this correctly, this should be exactly 3 inches from the bottom of my fabric, and I did. So that's another way that you can just make sure as you're going along that you're 3 inches from the bottom for your lettering, and that's going to help us when we start placing it too. Now this is, right now, we're just going to basically give ourselves a pattern to go with. So on my light box, I have just this middle part, and I'm just going to draw a line around about the center of where that Y is, because our bias tape will cover all of this, because remember it's a 1/2 inch wide. So you don't need to outline the entire letter. You just want to try to go as close as you can to the top and bottom of each letter. And then any curves, you'll just draw around. And I'm using white because my background color is black. If you chose a different color background for this block, then use an appropriate color. All right, and then I'm not moving the piece of paper because I don't have to. I can just slide this over on my light box and continue tracing my letters. And again, you can use your ruler and make sure that you are still 3 inches from the bottom, just to make sure that you are even all the way around. But remember, we're also going to be putting bias tape on this, so you'll have another chance to even that up. You just want to make sure that you're not like really far off. And I'm just going pretty much down the middle of these letters. And so you can see that I have my ruler on the bottom here, and it is right at 3 inches. And here are my last 3 letters. And again, we're just going to draw around in the middle. And then when we turn this off, you can see that I have all my letters laid out, and that is where my bias tape is going to go. And we're going to go make our bias tape and then start building it onto our background. For our cross grain bias tape, we're just going to spritz it down with some best press, and then we're just going to make it, and we're just going to run it through, and then we'll do the curving and everything later. We're just going to get it made. Moving my straight grain bias tape off to the side just so I can keep track of which is which. All right, so we're going to grab our background and we're going to start building out our letters. When you're doing your letters, I would just recommend that you sort of try to keep in mind just the perspective of each letter. So like with this H, you want to do the cross for the H last because you want that on top of the 2 legs. Same thing with the A. You want to do this curve before the cross because that curve would be underneath. When you're writing a letter, you do the curve and then the cross. So just keep that in mind. With the P's, I would do the curve first because then that leg can go straight up and down and kind of hide the ends of that curve a little better for you. So each letter that we're just going to walk through each one together. And I will show you a few little tips and tricks along the way too, just so we can, just have all of this done together. Now I would definitely use your paper template just to make sure you have lengths and things correct. So let's measure this H, and this is 5 inches long. So we're going to cut our little straight grain bias tape. We're going to start with the H because it's the first letter in our title. And we're just going to take some of the Eileen's tacky glue. And we're going to put a dot of glue at the end of this strip of bias tape and bend it back upon itself. Then we're going to measure 5 1/4 to 5 1/2. That's going to be up to you how confident you are with that. And we're going to go and cut that. I'm going to do 5 1/2 just because. Instead of using a plastic ruler, if you have a hot hammer by Clover, then I would suggest that you grab that. Because what you can do is you can lay your piece of bias tape on here and bend this around the end and give it a good little press. Then when you remove it, you can take a little dot of glue, put on the end of your bias tape, just like that. And then when we measure this, it's exactly 5 inches. So that's gonna go right here. Now before I glue this down, I am going to grab my 3-inch ruler And make sure that I am 3 inches from the bottom of this piece of fabric, which I'm not quite, so I'm going to move that up just a little. And then I'm just going to put a few little dots of glue up this leg. And since this is going to be on, this is the bottom, this is the first piece of the H, it can be glued all the way down. All right, and now I'm going to do the next leg, following the same process. Now this is not, I'm just going to tell you, this is not a fast process, okay? This is going to take a little while, but it's going to be so worth it. It's going to be so nice. So again, I cut that at 5.5 because that's how long that leg is. I'm going to lay this right on my hot hammer at the 5 mark. And I'm going to bend the other end around the end of the hot hammer, just like that. And give that a little press. Now you definitely want to go ahead and double check, make sure that your measurement's right before you glue it, because you can always adjust it. And now I'm just going to put a few dots of glue down the other side of my leg. Leaving my 3-inch ruler at the bottom of my fabric just to make sure my letters are all even from the bottom. And that's going to help me when I trim this block down. We want to make sure it's correct height. And remember, we have some pieces that are going to go down here. So we're just going to make sure the spacing is right. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is measure the cross member, and it's basically 2.5. Same process. Now, if you don't want to cut it, you don't have to. You can definitely just flip it around, give it a little press, and now you know this is going to be 2.5. Check it to make sure it is. Now you can snip that end, little dot of glue. Okay, so when you're glue basting this, help yourself in the future, because we're going to glue baste in the middle, but we're not glue basting the end, because that way when we go to applique, we will be able to lift these ends, and we can start and end our applique underneath this little cross member, and we won't have to do any back stitching or stay stitching for that, for either one of these legs. So you're only going to glue baste in the middle of the H here. Now the other thing you may have noticed, I did put the Teflon sheet underneath my fabric because there's no interfacing behind this. So you know, when you're gluing onto this, it's very possible that the glue is going to go through. So if you're doing this on your cutting mat or your ironing board or wherever you're doing it, put that Teflon sheet underneath there. If any glue seeps through your fabric, then it won't go onto your ironing board or your cutting table. It'll go onto this Teflon sheet and it will peel right off once it's dry. So here's our first curve in the A, and if you didn't want to mess with this, you could definitely make it a more like a Times New Roman and just make it, you know, straight up and down. But we're gonna do the round because I love this like Art Deco feel that I have going on with this font. This is when I told you to have a Teflon sheet because it's going to help you with the curves in this. So for right now, I'm going to put this to this, I'm going to put the background to the side, and I'm going to put my template underneath my Teflon sheet. And I'm going to grab a piece of my cross grain bias tape. So that was cut on the 45-degree angle. And I'm going to grab my iron. And I'm going to start on the right-hand side of this because, and I'm leaving a tail down there because I don't know exactly when I'll be able to get the curve in there. This is not a Teflon, this is going to become your crafting Teflon sheet because we're going to put some holes in it. I'm going to pin through the Teflon sheet, through the paper, into the ironing board cover. And this is a glass-headed pen. It is not a plastic pen. Do not grab your plastic pens. Glass head only. And now I'm going to pull this. I'm going to keep pulling it, keep pulling it. And it is a little slick on the Teflon, I know, but it will, it gives you the guide for the A. I'm going to put another pin right here. Oh, I also want to spray it a little bit, a little spritz. I also just remembered one more trick. I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes it's easier when it's this way rather than the other way. So we're going to get that back in place. And a little spritz with the spray starch. And then once you have that curve pretty much started like that, then you're going to take your iron and smooth out the wrinkle. And it will work. It does take a little time, but it will work. All right. Now, it does not have to be super perfect because we're glue basting this down into place, right? So if it's not spot on, then it's still going to be okay. And I will prove that to you because this is not exactly spot on, right? But when I move this, ooh, careful, the Teflon sheet's going to get super hot too, by the way. I'm going to move this to the side. Put my 3-inch ruler back at the bottom of my fabric. Get that underneath here. That's the way I know that they're level. And then I'm going to get my little scissors. Okay, so that's going to go right there. And then I'm going to just put a few little dots of glue. This is going to be the, remember the cross line here is on top. So all of this can be glued down. And I'm just going to put a few more little dots around. Smooth that out with your finger. This is where you remind yourself it is not a race. It is not a race. And then I'm going to go ahead and put one more little dot right up here at the corner because it feels like it wants to lift up there a little bit. Then we're just going to heat set this just for a minute. Actually, not a minute, for, 10, 15 seconds maybe. All right, so remember, this is our curved bias tape. We want to reserve it as much as we can. And we're going to go back and grab this little piece. And we're just going to lay that on there. And then again, because we want to be able to applique underneath on that entire upside down U of the A, we're only going to glue baste this in the middle, not on the outside edge. All right, let's go ahead and heat set that too. Since I'm moving it back and forth, I just want to make sure that nothing, you know, comes undone. And that's why I'm being a little more diligent about heat setting everything. That's how you're going to do your curves. You're going to use your paper template and a Teflon sheet and some pens, and you're going to use that as a template to get those curves for all of your letters. So I'm going to go ahead and do the P's. I'm going to go ahead and do both of them, and that way I can glue both of them down. And then we'll continue working on our happy hour block. Let me put this to the side again. And for the P's, like I said, I kind of like doing these upside down for some reason. I feel like I can get my curves stretched better that way. So for the P's, I'm just going to start by, and I like to leave the tail back a little bit because it seems like it takes a little time to get it to start curving. So if you start with your tail back a little further than where your letter starts, then you can, you know, get it to curve better. I may have wanted to start on the other side too. Yeah, I did. And don't forget, add a little spritz. Not a ton, but, you know, a little. That was probably more than I needed. Pen the other end, just so I can kind of bring this out and get that curve to relax. And again, don't be too critical of yourself if it's not perfect, because you can definitely allow yourself a little grace, and because you will be able to glue baste it too. You just want to have a pretty good curve started for it. So I think that's going to be good. And then I'm not going to cut this. I'm actually just going to use this to get the other P. And again, just spritzing that a little bit just to give myself a little more flexibility. Now, if you want, you could go ahead and do all of your curves and all of your letters and then glue baste them down. You don't have to go back and forth. I did that the first time and it worked out fine. So just, you know, that's another option too. All right, let's get our P's onto our background. And we're going to put these curves on first. Now, since the leg of the P is going to come straight down, I'm going to cut these knowing that that's going to cover that raw edge, so you don't have to worry about that. And this is the first part of the letter that we will applique. So you also don't need to be concerned about, you know, where you're glue basting with these. You can just glue baste it down and around. Now for the P, what you want to do is you'll want to put this right at the top of the curve and come down. And I glue basted in the side of the curve here, but I didn't glue baste up here, so I can pull that back to do the curve. And I'm also not going to glue baste down here for the same reason. That way I can kind of move this up and go ahead and applique underneath there and not have to worry about doing a stay stitch or anything. For the bottom of the P, again, I'm just going to put my ruler at the bottom, because it'd be 3 inches. I'm going to snip this a little longer so I can glue it back upon itself. And I'll just adjust that to where it falls nicely down here. And the same thing for the next one. Okay, there are no curves in the Y, so we can go ahead and do that. Okay, so the next letter we're going to do is the Y, and it's a little tricky, but this is how I've decided to do it. I am going to do my left little side going down, just like that, and I'm going to kind of snip this at an angle. And then I have another little piece that I've made to go up, just like that. Okay, and then the right leg is going to be a little fiddly, or the right side. This is going to be a little fiddly. I've glued it here, and you bring it down, and then you flip it back on itself, but this is going to be kind of a weird angle. So I'm just going to take this and cut it, and put a little dot of glue in there. And then when it lays down, it will go straight down like the side of the leg, and it will hide the cut side over here. And I am going to go ahead and glue most of this down because I'll probably just go down and around on this one. I won't try to, you know, hide everything on that one. We're going to very carefully fold this. We don't want to mess anything up there. And now we have the hour to do. Now remember, our H's are 5 inches tall. The little cross member is 2.5 inches. I did melt my the handles on my Fiskars a little bit. I had to get some sandpaper out and sand them down after they cooled off. I think if any of us make it through an entire project without something like that going on, then wow, I don't even know how I would handle that. It'd be amazing. Okay, so same process for this H. We're just going to put a few dots of glue down the legs, and then only in the middle for the cross member. We'll do the legs first. I have my ruler down here to remind myself where it needs to be, how far from the bottom of the fabric it needs to be. Okay. On to the O, and this is going to be the most difficult. Now, if you remember how we did the A, that's how you're going to do the U. And if you remember how we did the P, that's how we're going to do this curve for the R. So I'm going to go ahead and do all 3 of those pieces. I'll walk you through the O a little better, and then the U and the R I'll just demonstrate, and then we'll finish up our happy hour lettering. I am using my ironing board too, and not the Teflon sheet on some of these curves. That's because it gives me a little better friction. So if you can kind of get an idea of how big your letter is supposed to be, that's definitely what I would suggest you do with the O. And so I'm just going to get that first part of the curve going, and now I'm just going to keep going around. And you really can. You can get this to go into the O shape. It does definitely take a little bit of time, a little bit of patience, but it will work. And it doesn't have to be perfect, just, you know, close. And it's your quilt, so close for me and close for you are 2 different things. So just, you know, give yourself some grace. All right. So I'm going to put a pin here, And another pen here. I'm going to keep stretching this around. And this, just like the other curves, you want it to be close. It doesn't have to be spot on because remember you are glue basting this as well. So if it needs to be moved a little bit, you can probably get it to pull with the glue and hold with the glue. All right, let's see how close we are. Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah, I think that's actually going to be, that's going to be pretty close. I think it's going to be close enough. I think I might try to get this end here to come in a little bit more. No one's going to know if it's not exactly the same as the template because the template's not going to be there. Okay, let's get the rest of our letters glued down to our background. We only have 3 letters left. Then we get to do all the applique. Okay, for the O, what I have done or what I've decided is I'm going to go around the circle and then this side is going to come up and go back on itself. So I'm going to add a little bit of glue and I'm going to cut this right about there. But I'm going to start my glue somewhere over here. Put my ruler back down here so I know I'm not too far down. And I may need to snip that end a little bit more, I'm not sure yet. And I'm going to cut this out here somewhere. And I'm just going to let this end just fold back upon itself. And it's not going to be a perfect O. It's going to look like you drew an O, like zoop, right? Okay. But that will cover the beginning of our O. I'm going to put one more little glue dot right there. And there is the O for our happy hour. All right, now the U. The U, I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up the legs because the bottom is what needs to make sure that it's, 3 inches from the bottom of the fabric. I probably do put more glue on these letters than I do on like my applique shapes just because I want to make sure that bias tape does not shift on me. I'm not going for perfection here either. I'm going for close. If you want to take a ruler and make sure both sides of your U are perfectly even, then feel free to do so. But I'm just going for close enough on those. All right, and then for the R, oops, I actually want to do the little leg of the R first. Is this the stretchy? Yes, let's get some of this. Skip this on down. I am going to let the little leg of the R hang a little lower. This side I want at 3 inches. This side's going to hang a little lower because it's just a 90-degree angle. I may need to trim that a little more. We'll see once we have the curve in place. I'm going to start with the curved side of the R. And this is why I said, you know, cut extra bias tape, just because, like here, you know, I have all of this waste, but it allows me to get that curve exactly the way I need it. Okay, so then the last thing I have to do is the leg of the R. And again, I'm going to start from the bottom and go up. And just like the P, the only place I'm going to glue baste this one is in between here, so I can lift it to get to the sides of the curve. So I'm just going to put some glue in there. That's going to go up. I think I'm probably turning these under maybe 1/2 inch. That's going to be, you know, up to you. Definitely want to turn your ends under so you have a nice finished edge. And then there is my R. Okay, so I'm going to heat set this as well. And then we get the fun job of appliquing all of this down. If you have the time to let this dry, then I would suggest you do that. And then go back and just see if there's anything loose that you don't want loose. So all of my letters are glue basted down, and they're dry enough that they're not going to go anywhere. So I have basically rolled up this end of my piece and I've pinned it into place just so it's a little easier to maneuver this through my machine, because it is a full width of fabric. And we're going to start with the R here and just work our way through the letters. And basically anywhere that I left a little tail, it's because I can start appliquing there without a stay stitch. Now, since we do not have interfacing or a stabilizer behind these letters, you're going to want to go a lot slower than you normally would. Or you're going to want to like get some stabilizer and put behind your letters, which is obviously another option. And remember, I left this little tail loose because that way I can flip it up. And I'm just going to turn this and go back. I admit I did a little oops there. I should have started with this leg, but I didn't, but that's okay. I'll just do a little stay stitch and do him after I do the big leg. This is the same applique stitch as I've used on everything else. It's a zigzag stitch. I have it set at 1.8 wide and 0.8 long, so it's a very small little zigzag stitch, but same stitch I've used on all the applique on the entire quilt. Now, since I forgot to do this one first, I'll do a stay stitch here at the beginning and go down and around the leg. Once we start getting some letters appliqued down, we'll do the same thing on the other side. We'll just roll it and pin it into place. And it's just going to help us reduce some bulk and some maneuvering of all the fabric through the machine, since we do have a full width of fabric here. On the O, we're going to start underneath that last little blip or whatever, the last little end at the top there, just so we can go down and around the entire thing. We didn't have to do a stay stitch or a back stitch there at the beginning because we're underneath that other layer. Now we will have to do a stay stitch at the end because we're going to be sewing that down. On circles, just go slow. Don't try to go faster than you can maneuver your fabric through the machine. And if you do need to stop to pivot, make sure you're stopping with your needle in the right hand position. You'll just get a smoother seam or a smoother stitch that way. Now we're just going to go back around the other way. All right, now remember on our H's, we only glue basted the middle of this little cross hatch here, so we can flip up this end, and that's exactly where we're going to start with that leg. We're going to start right here, and that way we don't have to have a stay stitch or a back stitch because that little cross part will lock all of this into place for us. On a 90-degree angle like this, on the outer corner, you want to stop with your needle in the right hand position. It'll just give you a really nice turn. If you're not comfortable holding this back, just get a pin and stick it into place. We're going to do the exact same thing over here. And I do want to go ahead and snip my threads on this because I don't want any of that underneath this piece that goes apart, or goes across rather. And it doesn't really matter where you start with this. I like to start somewhere where it's a little inconspicuous, but I'm going to do a stay stitch, so it doesn't really matter. I love how this butter cotton shot just pops off of this black. It's so pretty. It almost feels like a neon, which is kind of what I was going for. If you don't like that, then you could definitely change the color to one that you do like. Remember, your quilt, your decision. Go ahead and pin these back all into place because we are moving on. Okay, on the Y, I am going to do this leg and down and around and up and over, and then do this last part. So I'm just going to kind of pull this back just a smidge. I might just leave it actually and do a stay stitch there and go down and around. I'm going to jump down. Since I did the end of this little cross here, I can just go straight here and do a stay stitch and then go up and around. Now the P is just like the A, hopefully, unless I glued it into place here by mistake. We'll do this part and then we'll do the straight leg. Oops. I did not need to do a stay stitch there, so don't do that. You don't need to. I mean, it's not going to hurt anything if you do, but you don't need to do it. The other thing I want to point out is look where my right hand is at. I'm not necessarily using the fabric close to the letter to turn it, but I'm using fabric that's a little further away just to give me a little leverage on turning it and keeping it smooth, going around that curve. Okay, on the A, we're going to start underneath this little cross line here. No stay stitch required because we're going to do that little cross hatch last. Again, if you're not comfortable holding that back, just pin it back. We have all our letters appliqued onto the background fabric. We're going to give this a good press, and then we're going to talk about our next steps. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do to this block is we're going to trim it down to the size that we need it, because next week we're going to make the ice bucket and the shaker and jigger. So we need to make sure that we can applique those onto the block, but we don't want the width of the width or the height of this block to be incorrect, because we need to know where to place those items. So the first thing we're going to do is cut the length, and that needs to be 42.5 inches. So fold it in half. This is going to be at 20 1/4. And I'm not going to lie to you, this is where you have to just be brave, and you just have to cut the fabric. All right, and then the width of this block is 9.5. Now, if you remember, our tallest letter was 5 inches. So we want to make sure that our happy hour is centered in the block. So what we're going to do is say, okay, so if my tallest letter is 5 inches, which is the H, then in my entire height is going to be 9.5. Then 9.5 minus 5 is 4.5. Divided by 2 is 2 1/4. So I should be able to take my large ruler here and lay it with 2 1/4 across my H right there, and then even with the fold in the fabric, and it should be even down here too, which it is. And that's going to be my first cut. Now I've turned this around so I can move this over. So I have those two edges lined up. Everything looks like it's still lined correctly. And then I'm just going to move over 9.5 inches, which should be 2 1/4 over here. And surprisingly enough, it is. Should be 2, well, actually it's 2.5. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, and yep, yeah, we're good. This will be 9.5 by 42.5. And this is going to be the size of my happy hour block. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do this week is going to go ahead and help us for next week, and we're going to cut our top and bottom border for this block and sew that on, and then we will be able to just start doing our applique with the ice bucket and shaker and jigger next week. We'll have to make those shapes, of course. Now, the top and bottom border for this block is chocolate. So let me get the chocolate fabric out here. And we need one that is 3.5 and one that is 2.5. The 3.5 inch strip goes at the top of the block, and the 2.5 goes at the bottom. So I'm just going to cut 2 width of fabrics and then cut those down to 42.5. We are almost done with the applique portion of this quilt. We have that shaker and jigger and ice bucket to do, but other than that, all of our applique is pretty much done. Now, I'm not going to lie, the happy hour block is a little tricky because of the way that you applique the shapes on, but you know, we'll walk through it together. It'll be fine. All right, I just need one at 2.5 and one at 3.5. And then also both of these need to be cut at 42.5 inches, just like our happy hour block is cut. The last thing we're going to do today is just sew our top and bottom borders onto our happy hour quilt. I would seriously suggest that you pin these into place. I am finding the center points, and that's where I am pinning. I will say that I love my Juki, and this is one of the reasons. I don't pin a lot, and it's because the Juki has a box feed system, and so it keeps both my top and bottom threads like really, or my top and bottom fabrics really well fed through the machine at the same rate. So you will notice that I don't pin as much as other quilters that you see for a few reasons. I just don't pin. I'm just not a pinner that much. But I also just trust my Juki to feed my fabric through. And I know that I have these cut at the same length because I triple check them. So there's my center point, and we'll remove that one pin, and then I will keep going on. But like I said, you know, pin your pieces, but you're basically just sewing the 3.5-inch strip to the top of the Happy Hour block, lettering block, and you're sewing the 2.5-inch strip to the bottom. And you want both of those sewn on before you start doing your applique, which we will start doing next week for the ice bucket, shaker, and jigger. Since I am going to be appliquing onto this block, I do a little back stitch at the beginning and end. That is another nice little tip for you, just to make sure that nothing shifts. And again, this is how I'm pinning. I'm going to drop my presser foot. I'm going to back stitch here, leave my needle in place. I'm moving it down to the middle and placing one pin right there on the fold of the fabric for both the brown and the black. Chocolate and black. Use a chocolate cotton shot. So now I'm leaning back, which you can't see, but I am. I'm leaning back in my chair and just keeping this evenly going through my machine with attention on that one needle in the middle of that width of fabric cut. Stop right there because that's very close. And then I'm just going to take the other end, both of these corners, pinch them together, lean back in my chair again, and do the entire rest of the border of this block. And I know some of you are going to come at me and telling me I need to pin and everything, and I do appreciate your opinion. And I fully support you pinning as much as you want. All right, I'm going to press this, and then we're going to have a reveal on the design wall. We're moving right along with our Happy Hour quilt. We have our Happy Hour banner done there at the bottom. It's going to come together so pretty. I love the way this quilt is coming together. We have a lot more to do, but not as much as what we have done. So we do have to do that ice bucket, and we do have to do the shaker and jigger on the other side. Then we have to do all the sashing and the cornerstones and the outer borders, and then we'll put our stars in there, and it's going to be amazing. This quilt top is going to come together a lot faster now than you believe it will. So I hope you stay tuned for next week. I hope that you have enjoyed this video for the Happy Hour Quilt Sew Along. I hope you picked up some few tips and tricks along the way. If nothing else, I hope it made you brave enough to take on some bias tape lettering and to pick up some tips on how you can make all those curves work for you. Use that Teflon sheet and some pins and get those curves curving as much as you need to for whatever letter you're trying to do. I mean, if we can do an O, there is no letter you can't do. So if you mastered that O, you have got it made in the shade. If you enjoy the content on this video, please give me a thumbs up. I appreciate all the likes. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so and hit the bell for notifications. That way you know when a video is uploaded and ready for you to view. Until next time, find joy in all you do, carve out some time for crafting and creating, and remember, it's always better when you make stuff up.